There's a certain silence that follows betrayal, not loud, not angry, but hollow, the kind of silence that comes when you replay every word you said and realize you meant every single one. You were real, honest, vulnerable. You didn't speak to impress, you spoke to connect, while they smiled with ease, lied with grace, and wore sincerity like a costume. You weren't naive. You were sincere in a world that profits from performance. And now you sit in the aftermath, not broken, just wiser and colder in places you used to be warm. The power of sincerity. They'll never understand what it cost you to be real in a world that rewards performance. To sit across from someone and speak without filters, without rehearsals, without any strategy to manipulate the outcome. You didn't use your words to impress, you used them to express. You didn't speak to gain favor, you spoke to offer truth. And in that offering there was a piece of your soul. You meant every word, every "I care about you," every "I'm here for you," every late night conversation when they were unraveling, and you stayed even when your own world was quietly falling apart. You never said what you didn't feel, and that made you dangerous not because of cruelty, but because of depth. Because sincerity, in this world, is a language very few speak fluently anymore. You listened to them with both ears and both eyes. You paid attention to what they didn't say. You remembered the small details. You celebrated their victories even when no one else noticed, and still, somehow, it wasn't enough, because sincerity doesn't always win. Not when you're facing someone who's mastered the art of pretending. They took your honesty and wore it like a medal until they didn't need it anymore. And when the time came to stand by the words they once echoed back to you, suddenly they were silent, distant, unrecognizable. But you never lied, and that's what sets you apart. You didn't need to. You weren't trying to win someone over. You weren't trying to craft a version of yourself that would be more palatable or more appealing. You just were, and that just being, that raw, unfiltered version of you is something they'll never find again. Not because you're irreplaceable in an arrogant way, but because what you offered was rare. Presence without agenda, love without conditions, truth without expectation. It's easy to regret being sincere. Easy to question why you gave so much of yourself to someone who never truly valued it. But that regret isn't yours to carry. That regret belongs to the one who couldn't recognize gold while holding it in their hands. Because one day, whether in a quiet moment or in the shadow of someone else's mask, they'll remember what it felt like to be with someone who meant every word. And it will haunt them, not because you wish it on them, but because the truth always echoes longer than the lie. So no, you weren't too much, you were honest, you were clear, you were real, and that will always hold more weight than the prettiest lie. Even if it doesn't feel like it now. Even if they moved on without a backward glance. Because sincerity leaves a mark. A quiet, permanent one in places the liars can never reach. The illusion they created, they didn't just lie to you, they built a world around those lies. Carefully, deliberately, like a stage play where every scene was rehearsed, every smile calculated, every gesture timed for effect. And you walked into that world with open hands and a willing heart. You saw the light they cast, not realizing it came from spotlights they controlled. You mistook the performance for a presence, the charm for character, the attention for affection. And why wouldn't you? They wore sincerity like a second skin, only to shed it the moment you started to believe in it. That's the cruelty of deception. Not just that they fooled you, but that they made you doubt the parts of you that trusted them. They studied you, not to know you but to mimic what you needed. They listened not to understand, but to collect ammunition. They mirrored your kindness, echoed your words, and walked in your rhythm long enough for you to believe it was real. And when you finally let your guard down, when you started to feel safe, that's when the curtain fell. Suddenly the warmth faded, the tone shifted, the eyes turned cold. But not all at once. No, they unraveled slowly, piece by piece, so you'd question yourself before you ever questioned them. That's how illusions work. They don't shatter, they dissolve. Quietly, carefully, painfully. You thought you were building something real, but what you were really standing on was smoke. Not because you weren't genuine, but because they never were. They didn't want love. They wanted loyalty without offering truth. They didn't want connection, they wanted control. And once they felt they had it, once they knew you'd given your heart freely, that's when the game shifted. That's when the mask slipped. That's when the silence began to speak louder than their once beautiful words. But you're not the fool in this story. Don't let the shame stick to you. The illusion wasn't your creation. You didn't lie. You didn't pretend. You weren't playing chess with someone's soul. You were real. That's why it hurt. That's why it still lingers. Because you weren't navigating a fantasy. You were offering your truth to someone who only ever gave you a script. And the most painful part, they knew what they were doing. They knew your intentions. They saw your heart, and instead of honoring it, they used it as a backdrop for their performance. Let that sink in, not to make you bitter, but to wake you up. Because not everyone who smiles is safe. Not everyone who says the right words means them. Some people walk into your life not to love you, but to study how you love so they can wear your language like a disguise. But no matter how convincing they were, the truth always finds a way to surface. And when it does, it doesn't just reveal them, it reveals you. The version of you who never had to pretend, and that version still holds all the power. The wound of being genuine, there's a unique kind of pain that comes from being genuine with someone who was never real with you. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It settles into the quiet spaces, the empty inbox, the delayed replies, the sudden distance that came without warning or closure. You don't cry because you were deceived, you cry because you were honest. And they weren't. You didn't lose them. You lost the idea of them, the version you believed in, the version you spoke to late at night, trusted in silence, defended without hesitation. But what you really lost, what truly cut deep, was the piece of yourself you gave so freely. The part of you that believed this time it was safe to love without caution. You didn't fall for their looks or their charm. You fell for what they pretended to be when no one else was watching. You fell for the vulnerable moments, the ones they staged just long enough to make you open up. And once you did, once you let them into the parts of yourself you never shared with anyone else, that's when the shift began. That's when the kindness you gave started to feel like a burden to them. That's when your consistency became too much. Not because you changed, but because the act was never meant to last. Because pretending to be genuine is exhausting when there's no truth behind it. They didn't just walk away, they walked away carrying pieces of you. Stories they didn't earn, loyalty they didn't deserve. They left with the blueprint of how to be loved deeply, and gave nothing in return. And now here you are, wounded, not by the loss, but by the fact that you meant it all. That every smile you gave, every reassurance you offered, every time you chose understanding over judgment, it was all real, and somehow that realness became the very thing that made you feel foolish. But you are not foolish, you are human, and humanity is messy, vulnerable, beautiful. You didn't love wrong, you loved deeply, and the world will always try to convince people like you to harden, to stop caring, to mirror the coldness that hurt you. But that's not strength, that's surrender. Real strength is keeping your heart open, even with scars. Real power is knowing you were genuine in a world that punishes authenticity, and still choosing not to become like the ones who hurt you. Yes, it wounded you, but it didn't ruin you, because the people who play pretend never win in the end. They move on quickly not because they've healed, but because they have nothing real to carry. You, on the other hand, are learning. Healing, becoming sharper, wiser, deeper. The wound of being genuine may ache now, but in time it becomes your armor, quiet, unbreakable, and honest just like you. The awakening, it doesn't happen all at once. The awakening is slow, quiet, even. It doesn't roar in like a storm. It comes in whispers, a pause in a conversation, a cold look that used to be warm, a laugh that no longer reaches their eyes. You begin to notice the details, the small fractures in the image you once held so tightly. You replay old words with new understanding. You start to see the performance for what it was: not love, not care, not loyalty, but survival, their mask, and it dawns on you, like a sunrise you never asked for. They were never truly there. You were always the only one standing without disguise. The hardest part of awakening is not what you see in them, it's what you finally see in yourself. The way you held on, the way you silenced your instincts, the way you defended the person who was slowly pulling away, even as you begged your heart to hold on just a little longer. Not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. Because you believed that if you loved them the right way, they would stay. But love doesn't fix deception. Love doesn't heal what refuses to be honest. And that's where the shift begins, in your silence, in your stillness, in the moment you stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it to begin with. The awakening isn't about revenge. It's not about proving anything to them. It's about seeing yourself clearly without their shadow distorting the view. It's about understanding that you didn't lose something real. You lost the illusion you believed was real. And when that realization lands, not just in your mind, but in your bones, something powerful happens. You no longer beg for clarity. You no longer seek closure. You no longer need their validation to confirm your reality, because you know, you've seen the truth now, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen, and no, this doesn't make you bitter. It makes you awake. Alert, stronger than you ever thought you could be. You stop speaking just to fill the silence. You stop chasing what was never meant to stay, and instead, you begin to listen to yourself, to your intuition, to the voice you silenced for far too long in the name of love. And that voice, it's clear now, unapologetic, steady, walking away with dignity. There comes a point where you stop explaining yourself. Not out of pride, but out of peace. You don't slam the door. You don't make a scene. You simply walk, quietly, fully, and with all the dignity they thought you didn't have. Because you finally understand that staying isn't strength when it costs you your soul. That holding on isn't love when it's one-sided. And that explaining your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you is a battle you were never meant to fight. So you step back, not as a victim, but as a survivor of your own compassion. You gave more than they deserved. You stayed longer than you should have. And now you leave not in anger, but in power. It's a strange kind of strength, the one that doesn't need witnesses. They'll never see the private moment you chose yourself over their approval. They won't feel the weight of the decision, the grief that comes with letting go of someone you once believed in. But you will. You'll carry it for a while. The silence, the memories, the ache. But beneath it all, something else begins to rise. Self-respect. Not loud, not boastful. Just quiet and rooted, the kind that doesn't flinch when it's no longer chosen. The kind that doesn't chase what once betrayed it. And yes, they may rewrite the story. They may paint themselves as the misunderstood, the mistreated, the one who tried. Let them. Let them say whatever helps them sleep, because you were there. You remember the way they shifted blame, dodged accountability, and disappeared when you needed truth. You remember the silence when you reached out, the lies wrapped in sweet tones, the promises that never stood the test of time. And more than that, you remember who you became trying to hold that sinking ship together. That version of you deserved better. And now they have you. You walk away now with your head high, not because you're heartless, but because you've learned. You've learned that love without respect is empty, that chemistry without commitment is chaos, that words without actions are manipulation, and you've finally stopped waiting for them to wake up. Because deep down they already knew. They knew your value, they just gambled that you didn't. And now the silence they left you in becomes your strength. The space they abandoned becomes your clarity, and the closure they never gave becomes your choice. You leave without bitterness, without performance, without needing to prove a thing. Because when someone throws away something real, they don't get the privilege of watching you rebuild. They don't get front row seats to your healing, and they don't get to claim a single piece of your future. You walk not just away from them, but toward everything they tried to convince you you'd never find again. Peace, wholeness, truth. You meant every word, they meant every lie, and that's why you win quietly, entirely, with dignity intact.